Ladies and gentlemen, in this RedGamingTech.com video we're going to be talking about the PC and the PlayStation 4 as well as next generation consoles in general as well as PC, and what their release is going to mean for PC gamers as well as the symbiotic relationship between PC and consoles. Now, I have done a similar-ish video before, however there were a few points that I wasn't able to make then, mostly because some of the specifications for the PlayStation 4 hadn't been formally announced, and obviously since then we've had some technology that of course is running now on the PS4, such as the Elemental demo from the Epic Games of course, and of course, there's a very good chance that we're going to be seeing the Infiltrator demo as well. Indeed, it's not a direct quote, but pretty much that they've said that they got Infiltrator working on exactly the same hardware as what they did the Elemental demo. That's a GTX 680, a i7 I believe, and 16GB of RAM on PC of course. And so there's a very good chance with some optimizations, I'm paraphrasing here, that they'll be able to get it on working on the PlayStation 4 as well. Now, sorry, before we heavily jump into the PC side of things in terms of distant future, let's talk about short-term future for the PC. Now, at the moment, PCs are being held back extensively by old technology, and by old technology I refer of course to the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. And to be fair, considering how old those systems are and the specifications that they actually contain within them, it's pretty impressive what developers are able to get out. For example, I've been watching Murasaki's playthrough of Gears of War, Judgment, and by the way, it's really funny, and I'm not just saying that, I actually really laughed. He's a ridiculously funny guy in Let's Plays, which is surprising. But, the graphics are actually really impressive considering how old the hardware is. But, honestly speaking, it's getting to the point now where when I see a game, for example Tomb Raider, which has been of course ported onto the PC, Resident Evil 6, Crysis, I could keep going, but I'm not going to bother to mention every game. I'm very impressed, especially with Crysis of course, but I can't help but think in quite a lot of the instances that certain things haven't really been improved that much. Okay, we do have higher resolution, textures, often better lighting, and, you know, a few bits here and there, but the main way it's actually improving upon the current consoles is, to be honest with you, resolution. And honestly speaking, there's a couple of reasons for this, but mostly it's just a generational thing. And right now, developers are moving on to the next generation of technology, and honestly, most of the time, software and hardware are symbiotic. It's kind of a catch-22. If you were to create, when for example Microsoft introduced the specifications of DirectX 8, and I just use this as a pure example, it took a while for developers to start incorporating those features, and by developers I mean game developers. However, graphics card manufacturers had DX8 stuff in them long before that. So as the hardware matures, it kind of requires the software to be there and the hardware for everything to work and be awesome. Right now, PCs, you know, have had far higher DirectX numbers. Of course, we've got hardware tessellation, hardware physics in many cases, and everything else. But the problem is, a lot of the time, these titles aren't really taking advantage of it. And it's simply because of the hardware. Now, obviously, when the PlayStation 4 is released, the fact that it can run the Unreal Engine is fantastic, and I'm really happy it can. I'm not surprised it can. It obviously was designed to be able to handle this next generation stuff. And as I've said several times previously, the very fact of the matter is an x86 type of architecture anyway, which means that, at least in theory, if a developer is creating Crysis 4, for example, and they want to port it onto the PC, or onto the PlayStation, or onto the Xbox 720, it's going to require a lot less effort on their part. They won't need to reinvent the wheel most of the time, and that's fantastic from the perspective of developers. So I've actually heard quite a few random discussions and read various forums about the thoughts of PC gaming now and in the future. Right now, PC gaming is definitely having kind of a surge, because PC gaming, to actually play games in much higher resolutions than console, you don't really need that awesome of a setup. And to be honest with you, even something like an old card like a GTX 460, which are pretty much free now on eBay, they're really cheap, and I just use this as a pure example, can play games at much higher resolutions and texture quality than an Xbox 360. Even though the technology is fairly old, you'll also notice that games now on the PC are really cheap. I've used this example before, but I think it's a good one, and that would be the deal that I recently got when it came to BioShock. How I basically managed to purchase the game was a fairly insane deal. I got BioShock Infinite, I managed to get XCOM, I believe it was, The Darkness 2, and I even think the original BioShock as well, all for £23, which, to be honest with you, is absolutely insane. It's far cheaper than the console derivatives. Now, admittedly, I did go to a pretty cheap website to do that, but even so, it's completely legitimate. All the Steam, all of it works fine on Steam, and I have no problems with that. And honestly, with Steam sales as well, to me, PC gaming is cheap, right now at least, to be able to play games of equivalent graphical power of the Xbox and PlayStation 3, but, the hardware's cheap and the games are cheap. PCs obviously offer another range of benefits as well, including mods, and I'm going to get into mods in a different video because I have some feelings on those that are going to take quite a while for me to talk about. Various options like, multi-monitor support with games, which, your mileage may vary on that. Some games definitely look really good on it. And, of course, much better online. Really sorry about my voice, by the way, today. I'm not ill, but it just turns out that I ate some really spicy food, and it's kind of making me a bit, odd speaking. Anyway, as I was saying, so that's for now. However, the future is going to be different. There are a couple of concerns I have with PC gaming, but generally speaking, they're not bad concerns, if that makes sense. There are the main concerns I have, such as how many people will abandon PC gaming, and will developers kind of, now that PCs are on a more level playing field with consoles, is there going to be problems there? In my opinion, no. The PS4 is definitely going to help in that regard. The concerns I actually have are more to do with the PS4 itself, and by which I mean the power of the PS4. The PS4 is definitely looking to be a very nice piece of kit. I've mentioned this many times before. But honestly speaking, in 2 years' time, the PCs will have moved on significantly. I'll give you an example. Right now, if you were to look at the Infiltrator demo, or should I say the Elemental demo, I've wrote a big article on that, and I've also done a graphical comparison in case you've not seen it. I imagine many of you would have, but just in case you haven't. And if you were to go check that out, you'll notice that the lighting is very different, and I've mentioned this before, but it's because they're using different lighting models, and it basically turns out that the PC version is using a more advanced lighting model than the PS4 version. So we're going to have this for quite a while, that yes, the PlayStation 4 is very good, yes it can run the engine, but already PCs are starting to really flex their power. And that's not really a surprise. We've had that for quite a while in PCs. PCs, some of the high-end graphics cards, absolutely insane right now. And to be honest with you, they're actually so powerful that we can play games in absolutely ridiculous resolutions. For example, PlayStation 4 is going to be able to output like 720p, 1080p, which of course is either 1280 by 720 or 1920 by 1080. There's a good chance in the future that those resolutions internally will be lower, and then it'll kind of upscale somewhat, just how the Xbox 360 is doing now on the PlayStation 3. But with PC right now, we are seeing certain gamers, if you've got like a triple monitor setup, for example, playing in stuff at like 5760 by like 1080p, which is absolutely insane. So in other words, you could have like 3 monitors by side to side, or 2 monitors, or you could even have one of the really big 30-inch 1440p or 1600p, I believe, screens as well. In other words, absolutely ridiculous amount of pixels on screen, and it looks very fantastic. Now, that's not really a surprise that Sony are not able to cramp that amount of power into the PS4, and it's not really a problem that they can't. However, certain people are starting to already worry that the PS4 CPU, Epic are, struggling. Well, not struggling, that's the wrong word, but they're not finding it easy. There are a couple of reasons for this. For one, it's not like the PC, where they've had the technology, or iterations of this technology, for a long time. Sure, you can argue that the PS4 is more similar to a PC architecture than, say, the PS3 was, and because of the amount of memory available and so on, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to program for. But simultaneously, they do have to learn quite a bit of stuff, and I imagine one of the troubles that they're going to be having with the PS4 is that the CPU is not up to scratch in regards to a PC CPU. It's multi-core, which, fine, 8 cores, but it doesn't really have the raw power there. And if you would compare this to like an i5 or even a pile drive or a bulldozer from AMD, it's just not as powerful. I think one of the biggest tricks that developers are going to have is quite simply using the CPU of the Jaguar combined with the GCN cores of the Jaguar, and obviously it is an APU at the end of the day, to really offload a lot of the tasks that Jaguar, the CPU section, can't really handle as effectively. Now, there are a couple of issues with that, and one of those would be that it does take away some of the graphical power of the Jaguar. For those of you who are PC gamers and you happen to be in the video owners, and if you happen to have something like any physics game, actually, I'm talking about hardware physics, so that would be Batman, Borderlands 2, Mirror's Edge, so on. You'll know that if you enable hardware physics, especially at the higher levels, it starts to take a toll on your frame rate. And obviously, the principle's not exactly the same, but it's similar here, in that as soon as you start saying to the GCN cores of the PS4, hey, you know what, you need to actually do this task, and they're going to say, okay, cool, bro, and they're going to do those tasks. Now, right now, of course, we think the PlayStation 4, well, initially the rumour was that we had 4 in reserve for these tasks, but it seems that that's actually not the case anymore, and they've just got the cores to do whatever they want, but this is still early. So, the problem is, you've got these absolute monsters in PCs now, and by monsters I refer to even a Sandy Bridge. I own a i5 Sandy Bridge, and I'm waiting for the Haswell. But to be honest with you, if I didn't do a lot of video editing for this channel, and you guys know how much content I've actually put out, I haven't actually put out much today. In fact, this is like the first video I'm actually recording. That's a long story, I'll quickly tell you. I ordered a new graphics card, and I took a while to order, obviously, as I had the final checks and everything, and then I basically got my bank account frozen because of fraud prevention, because it was a website I'd never ordered from before, so 40 minutes on the phone for that, and then I was recording Tomb Raider and the audio crashed, and God knows what else. So yeah, I've been having a bit of a trouble today. But as I was saying, that to be honest with you, if I didn't personally encode so much video, and I didn't really need the extra CPU power just to make the editing and exporting that much quicker, honestly, I would just keep with my i5 at this point. I'm running a 2500K, and I've heavily overclocked that processor. Well, not heavily, but quite substantially. I think it's at like 4.3. I could even overclock it more if I really tried, to be honest. And honestly, I'm having absolutely no performance issues on any games at all right now. And I have a feeling that with the PS4 release, it's sure at some point some games are going to definitely become more multi-threaded. And so sure, in some respects I might benefit more from, say, an i7, or maybe even one of the 8-core AMDs. But for now, I don't think I'm really going to struggle with that, and I certainly don't think I will for the next 2 years or so. I think on CPU side of things, my CPU is going to be so much faster than pretty much any of the games really require. Now, there are some considerations for that, and that's a bit of a general announcement. And one of the reasons they say general is because when you start to go with SLI, which is obviously where you hook, say, 2 cards together, or if I was with AMD, it would be Crossfire. It's put a lot more load on the CPU as it has to start providing data to more cards, as well as the rest of the system bus as well, but for the most part, let's just talk about the CPU for a moment. And this is also the case for if you go and try SLI, for example. And obviously it depends heavily upon the resolution as well as anti-aliasing, whether you're CPU bound. So I think in the very simple and very raw truth is that the PS4 is going to have some CPU issues in that regard. I think that the engines, however, the developers are now creating are going to be a lot better for this type of behaviour. It's also worth of note that AMD are not just happy for APUs to appear in the PS4. I'm not going to really talk about Intel for a moment, I'll just mostly focus on AMD just because it's like-for-like comparison and much fairer. But their APU idea is to add them to pretty much all of them. That means that if you were to buy a CPU in, say, 2 years' time, there's a good chance that there's going to be some type of GCN core, and I use the word GCN core very loosely. It could be something called, you know, pastis.com or something, for all I know. But there's a good chance that something similar is going to be there. And Intel, of course, are going similar methods, and even NVIDIA themselves are trying to add in a CPU of types into the GeForces, because it just makes sense. It's all about trying to offload and get the right components to do the right thing. And in regards to this, we're definitely going to see a more... It's going to be a very interesting time. There are some other concerns I have with PC gaming. For example, from Intel's side of things, after Haswell, the sockets become pretty much obsolete. That is, if you were to buy the follow-up would be known as Broadwell, by the way. It will be adopting a multi-chip package type of design. Now, in case you're not familiar with what a multi-chip package is, it's very simple. It pretty much means that if you were to open up your PC now, there's a good chance that if you're using AMD or Intel, that your system, your chip, you can simply remove, and by which I mean that it's just a socket. You would take off the heatsink fan, and you would pull a lever or whatever you have to do on your particular chip, on mine for example, and then you just take the chip out. So let's say, for example, you were to have an i3 in there with an Intel, you could replace it with an i5, no problem. If you wanted to replace say a non-K version of the chip with a K version of the chip, so you can have unlocked multiplier, you can do that as well. It's completely up to you. And in my opinion, I much prefer this design. Now I'm going to make probably another video on this, but it's quite a big subject. But stuff like that I actually don't like. There are some benefits to it, including reduced power, and it just makes it a lot easier. But it also limits upgradability quite a bit, and I don't really like that. I'm one of those people who like as many choices as possible with gaming, especially with PCs. I don't really like limited choices. It starts to really irritate me when companies do that, and so there's that slight problem as well. But in actuality, I'm actually quite happy with the direction of PC gaming right now, and I as a gamer, I'm very happy that the PlayStation 4 is actually up to these standards. Now, as I said, from the perspective of a PC gamer, the CPU on the PS4 does slightly worry me, but honestly, I think that it's going to be very good for PCs that the PS4 is going to be so close to them in architecture. Obviously, we're going to be seeing DDR4 RAM coming into as standard for PCs in the not too distant future right now as well. To be honest with you, even the Ivy Bridge and even the Haswell don't really require the absolute insane bandwidth of like GDR4 right now. Even if you look at the PlayStation 4 and how it's put together, sure, she's got 176 gigabytes of bandwidth per second, but the CPU does not need that. And developers have already hinted that the PS4 CPU is only getting around 20 gigabytes per second, which is a lot less than Ivy Bridge. If I remember correctly, and I'm not 100% on this, I think Ivy Bridge is around 30 gigabytes per second, roughly. But I'm not 100%. So it's definitely less anyway than Ivy Bridge. But it's still fine, you know, it's more than sufficient. Most of the PS4's memory bandwidth, of course, is going towards the GPU, simply because of those graphics core next are going to be used so significantly in conjunction with everything else. But honestly, it's going to be very interesting for me as well because of the new functionalities, especially with Xbox 720. I think that Microsoft could really do some cool things if they really started to integrate the Xbox platform with PC more. Although PCs do have some other issues, mostly regarding high price components are very expensive, as well as the technical problems. I know some people still get a bit off-put by the technical difficulties of PCs, and with compatibility patches and so on. For me, personally, I absolutely love PC gaming. There are many reasons for it. I'm not saying that I'm a fanboy. I do like console gaming as well, as it turns out. And I wouldn't be without my PS3. I actually do own a 360 as well, I just don't really play on it much. But I wouldn't be without my PS3 or my consoles, to be honest. But honestly speaking, I like gaming, period. But the very fact of the matter is that we do need a generational change. PC gaming is being held back really badly by this old hardware, and to be honest with you, not just PC gaming. I'm talking about gaming in general. Right now, the CPUs and the GPUs, the current consoles, just are not up to scratch. They can't hold enough data, the memory is too small. Dishonored, for example, so much had to be cut out simply because of the amount of memory. It limited them. And so, if you don't want graphics looking like it's coming from a Spectrum, you have to start making cuts. It doesn't matter what your original artistic vision is. There's what's known as realism, in other words, realistic direction for the game, and non-realistic direction for the game. In other words, what you actually want to accomplish and what you actually physically can accomplish. And right now, games are becoming so expensive to produce that the technology and the tools to actually produce them easy is becoming very, very important. And so in that respect, combining and making the consoles a lot simpler towards PCs is definitely a good thing, because honestly speaking, one of the things that really slows down development for PC games, or even stops the PC version appearing, is, quite honestly speaking with you, the cost. And because they know that PCs are a bit more tricky because of the combinations of hardware, and that's not going to change anytime soon. Not everyone is going to go and buy an AMD machine with, the latest Radeon, and not everyone certainly is going to have the same clock speed or the same amount of RAM or the same hard disks. Therefore, it becomes a lot harder to optimize. The other problem is that, honestly speaking, if they were to go ahead and release a PlayStation 3 port of a game with absolutely no improvements, people would be pissed. If you're a PC gamer, you would be pissed. You'd say, what's this? Where's the better graphics? Hey bro, what happened to the textures? Did you happen to, shift delete half of them while you're creating the game? What happened? In other words, we wouldn't accept that, and because they know that the game would just get slated, they would get slated. They can't just release a game that looks as good. For example, Resident Evil 6. When I was reading some of the comments on Resident Evil 6 for the PC version, I couldn't help but notice that quite a few people were saying it doesn't look that much better than console, blah, and so on. And I can kind of see where they're coming from. Yes, certain areas definitely do not look as good. But for me, it's not just textures in games right now. Debris, smoke, reflections, artificial intelligence, all of this stuff is really held back by the current generation of systems. And honestly speaking, we need to really start breaking free of these constraints, because even in BioShock, for example, as much as I love the game, I do love it, I'm still completing it, there were so many instances I just thought, this could have been so much cooler if they had a better hardware to work on. And to be fair to the developers, they actually did make BioShock Infinite on the PC look a lot better, play a lot better. They were more than happy to say to the PC gamers, hey, you know, you've got access to all the shortcut keys. That's cool. That's just what you've got. And you know, you happen to have access to much better hardware, and so we're going to give you much better textures. And therefore, even on the highest settings, your PC will probably cry unless it's a high-end PC. You know, if it's a low-end, medium-end spec PC, you're not going to be able to run BioShock Infinite on max, especially Shadows are really taxing. But if they had better technology and a lot more flexibility at the start of production, which is the PS4 era, and by PS4 era I also mean Xbox 720 or Durango, whatever you want to call it, it should allow them to do it and be a lot easier to just say, you know what, we can optimize for the PC and then make sufficient cuts down to the PS4 level as needed. And to be honest with you, the PS4 is not that much behind most PCs right now. Obviously, if you've got Tri-SLI Titans or something and, you know, ridiculously powerful CPU, then that's different. But for most systems, PS4 is not going to be that much behind graphic power-wise anyway. And I'm talking about the average gaming systems here. I'm not talking about super high-end sort of systems like SLI rigs or something like that. So I think because of all of this stuff, it's only going to be an improvement, honestly. Right now, PCs do have a number of other benefits as well, mostly regarding infrastructure on them. And that is the ridiculous size of hard drives and everything else that, of course, you could just easily plug into your system. And to be honest with you, one of the things that really pushed PC gaming, I wouldn't say exactly saved it, but in my opinion really helped it, was actually Valve and Steam. I think that, okay, there is still some work that needs to be done with Valve Steam. I think that it's by no means perfect, and obviously they are doing certain levels of optimization for the Steam box. But honestly speaking, Steam really did help PC gaming. It gave everyone the ability to share an ID, very much like Xbox Live, of course, but beforehand. And it also gave people the option to buy games, to be able to be part of a community. Now obviously you do have Origin and some other like Uplay out there, but to be honest with you, I'm not massive fans of them. I don't dislike them, but you know, there you have it. There are some other problems I have with PCs right now. I really don't like the regional lockouts on certain titles. BioShock, for example, is pretty much uniform around the globe, but other titles are not so much. Sometimes there's 3, 4, 5 day release issues, and I don't like that. I actually usually use a VPN or an American server to activate it. I've bought the game anyway, and I don't like waiting, to be honest. I don't think it helps anyone. I think it just really irritates the hell out of me, to be honest. I could make a rant video on that alone, and I could give you so many different reasons it pisses me off. And there are a number of other things as well, like the ability to tweak the game to the absolute maximum if you're not that technically familiar. To be honest with you, NVIDIA, with their new application, which names eludes me right now. Oh yeah, the GeForce Experience. That's pretty cool as well. It basically will say, hey, we know that your system is capable of running this at this spec. Would you like us to optimize it for you? And it will basically take a guess at running and setting the game how it thinks that you should be able to play the game. Now, for people like myself, and for many of you who are listening, it doesn't really help you. Because what it will say is, you know what, this is what we think that your system can run the game on. And it's kind of like Rage in that respect. Remember how annoyed everyone got with Rage when it basically just optimized the game for you? but it's not quite, you know, it's not just doing it, it's not draconian or anything. It just says, these are our recommended settings, would you like us to configure it for you? And you have to actually run the program anyway, and you download these game profiles. And in my opinion, it's a really, really nice thing. By the way, I've done a video on that, although it's an early beta, so it might have changed a little bit since then. But I'd recommend you check it out if you're not that familiar with it. But it basically says, hey, this is the system that, you know, this is the kind of specifications that we, or sorry, type of kind of settings that you can run at, and this is what we feel that we would like to set it to. So would you like us to do that? If so, awesome. If you don't want to do that, if you're a power user, for example, then you don't have to. The application also has other benefits, such as automatically updating your drivers. It's by no means a complete solution, but it helps. And for people who are not that familiar with the technology of PC gaming, I think it's definitely an improvement. What I'd like to see, and what I think would help gamers quite a bit now, is the inclusion of benchmarks into the games. Yes, Bioshock Infinite did it, although it wasn't exactly 100% user-friendly. Batman's done it. Quite a few other big titles have, and I think that's really good. It does give you an indication of how the game's going to run. But what I'd like to see is an application that would better set the graphics for people. I think it's got to be either the GPU or the CPU manufacturer who's going to have to do that, or maybe the game manufacturer would be good as well. And what it would do is it would take a rough guess at your system, and it would say, hey, you know what, all we have to do is just scan your system, and we'll set the game for you. Now obviously certain games are doing that already, and there are quite a few that, you know, take the game, make a rough guess, and go from there. But to be honest with you, most of the time they're hideously wrong. Especially if it doesn't happen to recognize a graphics card or a certain CPU or whatever. I can't remember what example it was, but I do remember that I just literally built a PC. Literally ground up, all new components. It was very high end for the time. And I don't remember what game it was, and I installed this game, and this wasn't even that long ago. And the game basically had set everything to low, and this is by no means the only example of this. So yeah, you know, I think that an improvement to make it more friendly, but it's still making sure that the tweakability is there for people who know what they're doing. I think that's good. And I know what you're going to say, well, you know, if you can't set a few basic game options, then you don't deserve to play PC. Stick with consoles. And that's a good example of something that doesn't really help any of us, to be honest. Because, honestly speaking, it just limits the audience of PC gaming, and I don't want the, you know, the boys club feeling of PC gaming. I don't want it to be kind of a you need to know what you're doing before you even attempt to set foot in here kind of thing. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The main one being that if you do that, it limits the audience. In other words, it limits the sales of games. And quite simply put, I'd rather massively increase the market, and I'd like to do that by, I wouldn't say making it more console-like, as in making it so that everything's simple and there's no upgradability and you just buy the machine as is. I'd hate that. I would absolutely detest that. All it would mean basically is we're buying very expensive consoles that can do a bit more. That would just suck. But what I would like is that applications of software do help more, and they are starting. As I said, the GeForce experience is starting. Games developers are starting to push that more as well. And definitely now the PlayStation 4 is starting to, well, will be x86 architecture compatible. That's going to be a big step forward as well. There's a lot of other stuff that I'd really like to talk about in this video, but it's already 35 minutes long, so I'm going to probably have to call it. This is going to be one of those subjects I think is also going to be very up in the air, especially since we know that Microsoft have not unveiled their Xbox yet, and I think that their specifications are going to really be interesting to me, as well as what they're going to be doing. Maybe some integration with Windows 8 would be good as well. But anyway, I think this has been a kind of a ranty video, but hopefully you've enjoyed it somewhat anyway. So take care and bye for now.